If you've ever heard about Dear John letters from Vietnam, forget that for a second. Because this story isn't about a girlfriend who stopped loving a soldier. It's about what happens when a war controls not only where you fight, but what you're allowed to know and who you're allowed to love. In 1969, an American soldier realizes his letters from home are disappearing, and the ones that do arrive have been opened and somehow feel replaced. One letter from his girlfriend sets off a chain of events, and he soon learns the most dangerous enemy nearby isn't in the jungle. It's inside the system. Chapter 1. Mail Call. The first letter never made it out of the jungle. Private First Class. Danny Mercer, didn't know that yet. He still believed in the small mercies, hot coffee if you got lucky, a dry pair of socks if supply remembered, a cigarette when your hands wouldn't stop shaking after contact, and most of all, mail. Mail was the only thing that made the war feel like a place you could return from. It turned the humid, rotting green into a hallway you could walk back through. A page with a familiar slant to the handwriting could cut a hole clean through the noise of insects and distant artillery, and remind you that a whole other world kept moving without you. Danny had been in country for 5 months, long enough to stop flinching at every helicopter, long enough to recognize the difference between outgoing and incoming by sound, long enough to understand that the war was not one story but 1,000 private ones, overlapping and contradictory. Long enough, too, for the ritual of mail call to become a kind of weekly religion. This morning, in the thin gray light before the heat arrived, the platoon's perimeter was still wet with dew. Foxholes exhaled a sour smell of mud and old sweat. Someone had brewed instant coffee in a dented canteen cup and was passing it around like communion. The men sat on ammo crates, boots sunk in the soft ground, rifles across their knees as if the weapons were part of their anatomy. A Huey came in low, chopping the air into frantic pieces. The rotor wash kicked up a storm of dust and dried leaves. The helicopter didn't land so much as hover and touch. One skid down, then the other, like it was afraid to stay too long. A specialist jumped out, a big canvas sack slung over his shoulder. "Mail!" he shouted. And for a moment, the platoon looked like kids at a summer camp. Lieutenant Rusk, fresh-faced, too clean, too careful with his words, took the bag and handed it to Sergeant Valdez, who ran mail call with the solemnity of a funeral director. Valdez stood in the center of the small clearing, letters in hand. "All right. Mercer, Daniels, Harris, Cobb." Names were called. Hands went up. Men tried not to smile too hard. The letters were thin, fragile things, already damp at the edges. Some had the red stamp that made your stomach drop, return to sender, because somebody had written the wrong APO number, or the envelope had been torn, or a clerk in Saigon had decided it looked suspicious. Danny waited for his name. Valdez flipped through the stack. His brow tightened the way it did when someone complained too much. "Mercer," he said at last, and Danny's gut released a knot. But what Valdez handed him wasn't the letter Danny expected. It was a small, square envelope addressed in a careful, older hand. His mother's, not his girlfriend's. Not the thick, messy bundle of pages Lisa used to send. Danny turned the envelope over. The flap was sealed, but the seal looked wrong. Too neat. Too new. Like it had been closed again. He told himself he was imagining it. There were some things you learned quickly out here. To distrust coincidences. To distrust quiet. to distrust your own instincts when they insisted on patterns. The mind made patterns because it couldn't stand randomness. The war was mostly random. The mind couldn't accept that. He slid a finger under the flap anyway. Inside, his mother had written about the small, safe things. The neighbor's dog had gotten into the trash again. The church was holding a bake sale for the boys overseas. His father's back was acting up. She asked him if he was eating enough, sleeping enough, praying enough. She told him she loved him. She told him she was proud. And at the bottom, squeezed into the margin like an afterthought, was a line that made his throat tighten. Lisa called. She said she's written 3 times and hasn't heard back. Are you getting her letters? Danny read the line twice, then a 3rd time, like repetition could change the meaning. He folded the paper carefully, almost gently, and slid it back into the envelope. Around him, men were laughing, cursing, reading aloud, tucking photos into shirt pockets, close to their hearts. Someone shouted, "Hey, Cobb, she still got that blonde hair?" And Cobb grinned in a way Danny didn't recognize. Danny stared at the envelope in his hands until the paper softened in the humidity. Lisa wrote every week, sometimes twice. She'd promised. She'd kept promises since high school, when she'd waited for him outside detention, because she said no one should have to walk out alone. She was stubborn like that. He'd received 2 letters from her since he arrived. 2. And both of them had looked strange. The first had been opened, the flap creased. The second had been delayed by 3 weeks, the date stamp smudged like someone had tried to rub it out. At the time, he'd blamed the war's chaos. Planes got rerouted. Bags got soaked. Clerks misfiled things. Everyone made mistakes. Now his mother was telling him Lisa said she'd written 3 times and heard nothing back. Danny had written Lisa after every patrol, sometimes in short bursts on a damp notepad, sometimes at night under a red lens flashlight. He told her small truths and big lies. He told her he missed her. He told her he was okay. He told her he was coming home. He wondered how many of those letters had actually reached Ohio. He tried to swallow the thought, but it sat in his mouth like grit. "Mercer!" Valdez barked. Danny looked up. The sergeant was staring at him, eyes narrowed. "You done daydreamin'?" "Yes, Sergeant." Valdez stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You got something on your mind. You take it to Chaplain, or you take it to your journal. You don't take it to the platoon." "Understood." Danny blinked. "I didn't..." "Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant." Valdez moved on, calling names again, but Danny felt like something had shifted. A hairline crack in a wall you'd leaned on for months, suddenly visible. The rest of the day was a routine of sweat and caution. They walked point through elephant grass that cut at their sleeves. They crossed a shallow creek, water brown as tea, and stepped over a dead water buffalo bloated and buzzing with flies. They found a fresh patch of disturbed earth. Someone had been there recently. And Valdez ordered them to skirt wide. Danny's mind kept circling back to the same image. A clerk's hands in a clean office far from the jungle, holding his letters, deciding what to do with them. That evening, back at the patrol base, Danny waited until the light faded and the men settled into their usual quiet. He pulled out his notebook and wrote a short letter to Lisa, the kind he could finish before the mosquitoes found his wrists. "Listen, Mom says you wrote 3 times. I only got 2 letters from you since I got here. I've been writing you after almost every patrol. If you're not getting mine, something's wrong. Please write the date on the outside of the envelope. And if you can, send one letter through Mom too, just in case. I miss you. D. He read it over twice, then folded it and slid it into an envelope he'd kept dry inside a plastic bag. He addressed it carefully. Then he hesitated. He'd never hesitated before putting a letter into the outgoing pile. It felt like a betrayal of the one thing he'd been clinging to, the idea that words could travel safely between worlds. He sealed it anyway. The outgoing mail was collected in a smaller bag and handed off whenever the next supply run came through. Danny watched Valdez take the bag with the casual authority of a man who controlled more than ammunition and patrol schedules. Danny thought of the line his mother had written in the margin. "Are you getting her letters?" No, not all of them. The next day, rain came down in sheets, turning the camp into a swamp. The men moved slowly, everything heavy with water. The Hueys didn't come. The radio crackled with static. The world shrank to the radius of the perimeter, and the wet, sour smell of rot. By late afternoon, the rain softened to a drizzle. Danny was cleaning his rifle under the shelter of a poncho when Specialist Numbers Klein dropped into the foxhole next to him. Klein had gotten his nickname because he could rattle off radio frequencies, grid coordinates, and baseball stats with equal ease. He'd been a college kid before the draft. Now he looked older than his father. "You look like hell," Klein said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Thanks." Klein exhaled smoke. "You ever notice mail comes in bursts, like the post office remembers we exist and then forgets again?" Danny shrugged. "It's a war." Klein leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I heard something." Danny stopped wiping the bolt. "What?" "Don't ask me where. Just something. About letters. Some guys in Alpha Company started complaining that their people back home weren't getting them. And their people swear they're writing. Like it's just disappearing." Danny's stomach tightened. "Maybe it's lost." Klein's eyes flicked toward the center of camp, where Valdez was talking with Lieutenant Rusk near the radio shack. "Yeah, maybe. Or maybe somebody's screening more than they're supposed to." Danny looked at Klein. "Censoring?" Klein gave a humorless laugh. "They're allowed to black out stuff. Locations, operations, all that. But you ever see a letter just not show up?" Danny didn't answer. Klein tapped ash into the mud. "My sister sent me a newspaper clipping last month about protests back home, about body counts, about politicians. She said Dad got into a shouting match at the VFW because people are saying the war's unwinnable." His face tightened. That letter arrived opened like someone had read it and didn't like what it said. Danny felt that hairline crack widen. Klein watched him carefully. "You missing letters?" Danny hesitated. Honesty could make you feel clean for a second and dead a minute later. He chose his words. "Maybe. I don't know." Klein nodded like that was answer enough. "Just be careful. That's all." He climbed out of the foxhole and disappeared into the rain. Danny sat with his rifle and listened to the camp's small noises, men coughing, someone laughing too loudly, the distant thump of artillery, like a giant heartbeat. He thought about the system that connected him to home. Bags, planes, clerks, stamps, and rules. A thin thread stretched halfway around the world. How hard would it be to cut it? 2 days later, the Huey arrived with supplies and outgoing mail. Danny watched the specialist take Valdez's bag and toss it into the helicopter. Like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the only proof that some part of Danny still existed outside the war. That night, Danny lay on his poncho liner and stared at the darkness. The jungle hummed and clicked, alive with unseen things. He tried to picture Lisa in her bedroom, sitting at her desk, licking an envelope, dropping it into a mailbox with trust. He tried to picture his own envelope moving the other direction, passing through hands he couldn't see. And then, for the first time since he'd arrived in Vietnam, Danny felt a fear that wasn't about bullets. It was about silence. A week passed with no mail at all. The platoon moved to a new area of operations, farther from the river, deeper into the low hills. The terrain changed, becoming tighter, more closed in. The trees looked older, their roots like knotted fingers. The air was thicker, smelling of damp earth and something faintly chemical that Danny couldn't name. On the third day in the hills, they walked into an ambush. It started with a single crack, sharp, loud, close enough that Danny felt it in his teeth. Then the world erupted. Automatic fire stitched through the brush. Men yelled. Someone screamed a name. Danny dropped, pressing his face into the wet ground as rounds snapped overhead. "Contact front," Valdez roared. "Return fire. Move!" Danny raised his rifle and fired into the green where muzzle flashes flickered like angry fireflies. His heart hammered so hard it hurt. The noise was total, drowning out thought. They pushed through, flanking left. The enemy melted back the way they always did, leaving behind a few blood trails, a couple of abandoned packs, nothing you could point to and call victory. When it was over, Danny's hands wouldn't stop shaking. They counted heads. One man didn't answer. PFC Tommy Harlan, 18 years old, freckles, a voice that cracked when he got excited about anything. He'd joined the platoon 2 weeks ago. He'd shown Danny a photo of his girlfriend holding a puppy and said he was going to marry her the second he got back. They found Harlan face down in the mud, eyes open, mouth filled with dirt. A single round had taken him through the throat. Danny stared at the body until Valdez yanked him back. "Mercer, help with the perimeter." They set up defensive positions. They waited for extraction that might or might not come. Night fell heavy and fast. The platoon was quieter than usual, grief turning men inward. Even the ones who pretended not to care moved differently, as if something had been stolen from their joints. Lieutenant Rusk sat with the radio operator, trying to get through to battalion. The radio hissed and popped, useless. Danny sat in his foxhole, rifle across his knees, and watched the darkness. Harlan's death should have felt like the biggest thing that happened that day. In the war's logic, it was. A life ended. A family shattered. But Danny's mind kept drifting back to mail. Because if letters could disappear, then maybe men could too. Maybe Harlan's girlfriend would never get the letter he'd written the night before. Maybe she'd wait, and finally receive a folded telegram with a stranger's signature. Maybe the war would reach her only through official words stripped clean of any truth. Danny thought about how control worked, not just with guns, but with information, with what people were allowed to know and when. In the small hours before dawn, Valdez came to Danny's foxhole. The sergeant crouched, his face a shadow. "Mercer," Danny sat up. "Sergeant?" Valdez looked around, then leaned in close enough that Danny could smell tobacco and damp cloth. "You been asking about mail?" Danny's mouth went dry. I just... Valdez's voice was quiet and hard. "You want to survive this tour? You keep your head where it belongs. You understand me?" Danny forced himself to meet Valdez's eyes. They were not cruel. They were tired. And that was worse because tired men did cruel things like they were chores. "Yes, Sergeant," Danny said. Valdez held his gaze for a long second, then stood. "Good." He walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Danny didn't move for a long time. Above the trees, the sky was beginning to pale. The first birds called, indifferent. Danny thought of his letter to Lisa, the one he'd asked her to date on the outside. He imagined it sitting in some bin somewhere, never moving. He imagined someone deciding that silence was better than truth. And he realized, with a cold clarity that cut through fear, that the story of his war might not be written by the men who fought it. It might be written by the men who controlled what got through. When the extraction finally came after sunrise, the platoon carried Harlan's body out in a poncho. The helicopter's rotor wash flattened the grass and threw grit into Danny's eyes. As they lifted off, Danny looked down at the shrinking patch of jungle and thought of the thin thread that connected him to home. He could feel it fraying. And somewhere far away, in an air-conditioned room with fluorescent lights, someone might be holding a letter meant for him, reading it, weighing it, deciding whether Danny Mercer deserved to hear from the world he was fighting for. Chapter 2. The Letter. The letter arrived on a day that felt too quiet to be trusted. No rain, no helicopters, no sudden crackle of the radio that made everyone freeze. Just heat pressing down like a hand, and the jungle breathing around them, wet leaves, sour earth, the constant insect whine that drilled into the back of the skull. They'd moved again after Harlan. Another patrol base, another scraped-out perimeter, another set of rules about where you could piss and where you absolutely couldn't. The platoon had absorbed the death, the way it absorbed everything, with jokes that weren't funny and silences that were worse. Danny tried to write once, the night after the ambush, but the words came out stiff and false. "I'm okay." He tore the page in half and fed it to a small fire until it curled into black flakes. Mail call didn't happen every day, but they always listened for it anyway. Always perked up at the distant chop of rotors, always pretended they didn't care and then cared too much. When the Huey finally came in, it wasn't the usual supply bird. This one was slicker, its paint less scraped, the crew chief wearing clean gloves. It landed fast and lifted fast, like it was on a schedule that mattered. The mail sack came with it. Sergeant Valdez took the bag without ceremony, though Danny noticed the way Valdez's hand tightened on the canvas strap. He carried it to the center of the base and called the men in, face unreadable. Lieutenant Rusk stood off to one side, watching like a man supervising inventory. Valdez began reading names. Danny tried to keep his expression flat. He told himself it didn't matter. Whatever showed up would show up. Whatever didn't, wouldn't. "Mercer," Valdez said. Danny stepped forward. Valdez handed him a single envelope, already damp at the corners from the air. Danny recognized Lisa's handwriting immediately. She wrote his name with a loop in the D, like she was underlining him with affection. The address was neat, familiar, the kind of thing he could have picked out of a stack, blindfolded. His heart did a stupid, hopeful thing. Then he saw the stamp. Not the postage stamp. Those were always the same. He meant the other mark, a small purple rectangle, faint but visible if you knew where to look. Passed by Us Army Examiner. He'd seen it before on other guys' letters, but it always sat on the back, near the seal. This one was on the front, slightly crooked, as if someone had added it in a hurry. Valdez's eyes stayed on him a beat too long. Danny forced himself to say, "Thank you, Sergeant," and stepped back. The moment he was alone, he turned the envelope over. The flap was sealed, but the paper around it was wrinkled. Tiny cracks in the glue line, like it had been opened and pressed down again. Someone had tried to make it look untouched and hadn't cared enough to do it well. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. Then he noticed something else. The date on the postmark. It was from 2 weeks ago. Lisa wrote every week, sometimes twice. If this was only 2 weeks old, it shouldn't feel like it had been on a long trip through too many hands. It should have looked cleaner, less handled. Danny slid the letter into his shirt pocket and waited. Not because he wanted to be dramatic, because men in a platoon learned the privacy rules quickly. Don't read a letter where anyone can see your face changing. Don't give anyone a reason to ask questions you can't answer. That night, the perimeter settled into its usual rhythm. Distant flares popped like slow fireworks. Someone in another unit played a harmonica badly. The jungle smelled of crushed leaves and diesel. Danny climbed into his shallow foxhole, pulled his poncho liner around his shoulders, and took out the envelope. He held it for a second, weighing it like it contained something heavier than paper. Then he opened it. The first page was Lisa's stationery, pale blue paper with faint white lines, the kind she bought because it made her handwriting look more grown up. He recognized it instantly because she'd used the same kind in high school for notes she slipped into his locker. His pulse steadied. Familiar. Then he started reading, and his stomach began to fall as if he'd stepped off something solid. Danny? No nickname. She always wrote Dan or Danny, or when she was trying to tease him, Private Mercer. She never started with just Danny. And a dash like a business letter. I don't know how to say this without hurting you, so I'm just going to say it. I can't do this anymore. I tried, I really did. But I'm tired of waiting, and I'm tired of not knowing, and I'm tired of being scared every day. You don't write like you used to. I don't feel like you're even here with me. Danny blinked hard. He'd written her after almost every patrol. Maybe the words weren't romantic. Maybe they were clipped. But he wrote. He wrote until his fingers cramped. If she wasn't getting them, it wasn't because he'd stopped. He read on. Mom says you're not getting my letters, but I don't know what to believe anymore. Maybe you just don't want to answer. Maybe you've changed. Everyone says men come back different. I guess I'm seeing it even before you come back. His mouth went dry. Lisa didn't talk like this. She didn't stack maybe on top of maybe like she was building a case. Lisa was blunt. When she was angry, she said, I'm angry. When she was scared, she said, I'm scared. She didn't hide behind soft words. He kept reading because the alternative was worse. There's someone here. His name is Mark. He works with my dad. He's been kind. And I need kindness right now. I'm sorry. Please don't hate me. Please don't write back. I think it's better if we just let this end. Danny stared at the words until the ink blurred slightly in the humid air. His hands were steady. Too steady. Like his body had gone into a strange, cold mode where emotion was postponed. Mark. Lisa's father worked at a small machine shop outside Dayton. Danny had been there. He'd helped Lisa's dad change a tire once, sweating in the summer sun, listening to the older man talk about layoffs and overtime. There were guys named Mark in the world, sure. But Lisa would never introduce someone here like a generic character. If there was someone, Danny would have heard about him long before, because Lisa told him everything, even the things she thought didn't matter. And then there was the line that made his eyes narrow. Please don't write back. Lisa loved letters. She kept them. She reread them. She pressed them into books and forgot they were there until years later. Even if she wanted to break up, even if she was hurting, the idea that she'd tell him not to write, like his words were a contamination, felt wrong. He reached for the second page. There wasn't one. The letter ended there. Abrupt. No closing joke. No love. No take care. No be safe. Nothing. Just the blunt, clean severing of a wire. Danny sat back, the bottom of the foxhole wet and cold under him, and let the jungle noise fill the silence. His first thought was the simplest one. She left you. The thought hit like a round to the chest. Not fatal, but stunning. It made breathing feel optional. His second thought came immediately after, sharper. This isn't her. He didn't know how he knew. He just did. The war taught you to recognize patterns, the difference between normal jungle sound and the sudden hush before an ambush. The difference between a man's usual jokes and the forced laughter that came before he broke. The difference between truth and something dressed up to look like truth. Danny pulled the letter closer, reading it again, this time like a detective, not a boyfriend. The paper smelled faintly of cigarettes. Lisa didn't smoke. The ink looked slightly heavier than hers. Her pen strokes were thin, quick, the loops light. This was thicker, slower, the pressure uneven, like someone trying to imitate her but writing with a different hand. And there was something else. The envelope. Lisa always dated the outside. After his last note to her, after his mother's line in the margin, he'd asked Lisa to write the date on the outside of the envelope. It was a simple request, easy to do. This envelope had no date. Maybe she forgot. Or maybe she never saw the request. Or maybe she never wrote this letter at all. Danny folded the pages carefully, but his hands weren't gentle anymore. He shoved it back into the envelope and stared at the seam where it had been resealed. Someone had opened it. Someone had wanted him to read it. Why? He listened to the night sounds and realized something even more unsettling. He wasn't just being cut off from home. He was being manipulated. A breakup letter could wreck a man out here. Danny had seen it. Guys spiraling after Dear John letters, walking into patrols like they didn't care if they lived, making dumb mistakes, picking fights, turning to whiskey when they could get it, turning to pills when they couldn't. The war didn't need to kill you with bullets if it could make you stop trying to survive. He pushed the thought away, but it stuck. Somewhere above the tree line, a flare went up, turning the jungle silver-white for a moment. Danny's shadow jumped across the wall of his foxhole. When the light died, he heard movement behind him. Mercer. Danny turned, rifle already half raised. Then he recognized the voice, Specialist Klein. Klein crouched at the edge of the foxhole, eyes flicking to Danny's hands. You got mail? Danny didn't answer. Klein's gaze landed on the envelope. From her. Danny swallowed. Yeah. Klein waited. He'd always been like that. He didn't crowd you, didn't pry. He just stood there like a man offering a hand, without forcing you to take it. Danny held up the letter. It's wrong. Klein's brow tightened. Wrong how? Danny hesitated, then unfolded the pages and handed them over. Klein read quickly, lips moving slightly as if he couldn't help it. The longer he read, the more his face changed, from curiosity to disbelief to a kind of quiet anger. When he finished, he looked at Danny. "This doesn't sound like her. You don't even know her." "I know writing." Klein tapped the paper. "This is constructed. It's like someone wrote it to hit certain buttons." He glanced at the purple stamp on the envelope. "And that examiner mark, why is it on the front?" Danny's throat felt tight. "So you think it's fake?" Klein didn't answer immediately. He folded the pages and handed them back like they were evidence. "I think somebody wants you distracted, or broken, or both." Danny stared at the letter in his lap. "Who?" Klein's eyes flicked toward the command side of the base, where Lieutenant Rusk's small tent sat near the radio shack. "Pick a category. Army, intelligence, some clerk with too much power, or just some asshole who thinks it's funny." Danny felt heat rise in his chest. "This is my life." "I know," Klein said softly. "That's why you need to be smart." Danny looked up. "Smart like what?" Klein leaned closer, voice low. "You still got carbon paper?" Danny blinked. "What?" Klein gave a brief, sharp smile. "Typewriter carbon. Some guys use it to make copies of letters before they send them, in case they don't arrive. You got any?" Danny shook his head. "Okay, then we do it the old way." Klein pulled a small notebook from his pocket and tore out a clean sheet. "You write her again, but this time you put something in it. Something only she would recognize. Something that proves it's you. And you tell her to reply in a specific way." Danny stared at the blank paper. "Like a code." "Not a code," Klein said. "A test." Danny's mind raced. The idea of reaching through the system and touching Lisa directly felt almost impossible. But it was something. A rope thrown into darkness. "What if they intercept it again?" Danny asked. Klein's eyes hardened. "Then they'll show their hand. Because if they're doing this, they won't resist messing with it. People like that can't help themselves." Danny looked down at the purple stamp again. Passed by U.S. Army examiner. He'd always thought examiner meant censor. Someone making sure you didn't write your unit's location or talk about operations. He'd never considered that examiner might mean something else. Someone who examined lives and decided what parts of them could remain intact. Danny took the paper from Klein with fingers that finally began to shake. He tried to think of something only Lisa would know. There were 100 small things. The time she stole a "do not remove" sign from a library desk and they got chased by an angry librarian. The cheap silver ring she wore on a chain when she didn't want her mother to see it. The code word they used when they wanted to leave a party early. Milkshake, because it sounded innocent. Milkshake. Danny almost laughed at how absurd it felt to cling to a silly word in a war zone. He began to write. He crossed it out and wrote again. "Lisa." He stopped. No. If this letter was intercepted, he didn't want it to look like the last one. He wanted it to feel like him unmistakably. He wrote, "Hey, you." Klein watched, silent. Danny wrote slowly, choosing each line like it mattered. "I got a letter today that doesn't sound like you. If it is you, then I'll respect it. But I need to know it's really you. Do you remember the word we used when we wanted to leave a party early? If you do, write it at the top of your next letter. Just the word. Nothing else. If you don't, then I'll know something's wrong." He paused, then added a detail that made his eyes sting. "And if you can, Send a short note to my mom with the same word. She'll know what to do. He signed it simply. Danny. He read it back and felt the strange mix of hope and dread that came with any plan in Vietnam. Hope that it might work. Dread that it might make things worse. Klein nodded once. Good. Danny folded the letter, sealed it, and wrote Lisa's address carefully. Then, on a second envelope, he wrote his mother's. Inside that one, he wrote a single line. If Lisa writes you with the word milkshake at the top, you'll know it's her. If she doesn't, something's wrong with the mail. Please keep everything you get. Don't call the army. Just keep it. He sealed that too. 2 letters. 2 threads. The next morning, when Valdez collected outgoing mail, Danny watched him like a hawk. Valdez moved down the line of men, taking envelopes with a grunt. When he reached Danny, he held out his hand. Danny placed the 2 letters into Valdez's palm. For a fraction of a second, Valdez's eyes dropped to the second envelope, the one to Danny's mother. His thumb brushed the corner as if weighing it. Then he looked up. Their eyes met. Valdez's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind it. Recognition, maybe, or annoyance, or warning. Valdez slipped the letters into the bag. Anything else? He asked, voice neutral. No, Sergeant, Danny said. Valdez nodded and moved on. Danny watched the bag disappear toward the command tent, and he felt the same fear as before. Only now it had a shape. It wasn't just about silence. It was about someone actively shaping what he was allowed to feel. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Rusk called Danny over. Danny wiped sweat from his palms and approached the lieutenant's tent, heart tapping against his ribs. Rusk sat on a folding chair under a camouflage net, a clipboard on his knee. He looked up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mercer, Rusk said. How are you holding up after, Harlan? Danny kept his face blank. I'm fine, sir. Rusk nodded like he'd expected that answer. Good. Listen, I'm doing a little check-in with the guys. Morale. Letters from home can... He paused, searching for the right word. Can affect performance. You understand. Danny's spine stiffened. Yes, sir. Rusk tapped the clipboard with his pen. You got mail last night, right? Danny's mouth went dry. He didn't know whether to lie. In the jungle, lying to an officer could be a death wish. But telling the truth felt like handing someone a weapon. Yes, sir, Danny said, carefully. Rusk's smile stayed fixed. Everything okay? Danny heard Klein's warning in his head. Be smart. He met Rusk's eyes. Yes, sir. Rusk studied him for a second, then nodded. All right. If you need to talk to the chaplain, let me know. Yes, sir. Danny turned to leave. Rusk's voice followed him, gentle and sharp at the same time. Oh, Mercer. Danny stopped. Try to keep what you write home appropriate. Rusk said it like advice, like a friend. Your folks don't need unnecessary worry. Danny felt his jaw tighten. Yes, sir. He walked away, his boots sinking slightly in the soft ground. Behind him, Rusk's pen scratched against paper. Danny returned to the platoon's area and found Klein. He asked me about the letter, Danny said quietly. Klein's eyes narrowed. Rusk? Danny nodded. Klein exhaled slowly. Okay, that's not normal. Danny's hands curled into fists. So what do we do? Klein glanced around, then lowered his voice. We wait for the reply, and while we wait, we watch who touches the mailbag, who controls the handoff, who has access. Danny looked out at the perimeter, at the green wall beyond it. Waiting in Vietnam was its own kind of torture. waiting for contact, waiting for a helicopter, waiting for your number to come up. Now he was waiting for a word. Milkshake. A ridiculous little test that suddenly felt like the only honest thing left. That night, Danny lay awake, listening to the jungle, and thinking about Lisa's handwriting. The real one. The way her Y's dipped low, the way she dotted E's like she was tapping a point into the paper. He imagined her at home, sealing an envelope, unaware that a stranger might be reading her words under fluorescent lights. He imagined a man deciding which version of Lisa Danny deserved. And he promised himself something in the dark. If the reply came wrong, if the word wasn't there, he would stop being careful. He would find out who was touching his life, even if the trail led somewhere he wasn't supposed to look, even if it led into the army itself. Because whatever the jungle could do to his body, it was nothing compared to what silence could do to his mind. And silence, Danny was learning, could be manufactured. Chapter 3. Return to Sender. The reply came on a bright morning, the kind that made the war look almost harmless. Sunlight poured through the canopy in broken beams. A line of ants carried something pale and dead across the edge of the perimeter. The men moved slow, saving energy, waiting for the day to decide what it would take from them. The Huey arrived just after 900. It hovered, dropped, lifted, never staying long enough to feel real. The mail sack hit the ground with a dull thud, like a body. Sergeant Valdez took it. Lieutenant Rusk stood nearby again, pretending he was there for routine, for procedure, for discipline. Danny watched them both without trying to hide it anymore. Valdez called names. Men stepped forward, took their envelopes, retreated with their secrets. Mercer. Danny's chest tightened. He walked up. Valdez handed him 2 envelopes. One was addressed to him in Lisa's handwriting again. The other was for his mother. Same careful older hand as always, but the envelope looked wrong. Too clean, too crisp, like it hadn't traveled through the same mud and sweat as everything else. Danny's fingers went cold. Valdez's eyes lingered. "Don't lose those," he said, voice flat. Danny looked at him. "Wasn't planning to." A flicker crossed Valdez's face. Anger, warning, maybe even regret. But it was gone fast. Danny stepped away. He didn't wait for night. He didn't wait for privacy. He walked behind a stack of ammo crates and tore open Lisa's envelope with a thumb that shook. There it was, right at the top of the first page, written in block letters like someone trying too hard. Sunshine. Danny stared at it. His ears filled with a rushing sound. Blood, adrenaline, something primal. Sunshine wasn't their word. Their word was milkshake. He read the rest anyway, because pain demanded witnesses. The letter was longer than the last one, and it tried to be gentle, tried to sound like Lisa, without actually being her. "Danny, I got your letter. I remember what you mean. I'm sorry for everything. I don't want to fight. I just want peace. Please don't make this harder. Please accept it and focus on getting home. That's what matters. No mention of anything real, no small detail, no familiar bite of humor, just vague comfort like a pamphlet. It wasn't Lisa speaking. It was someone managing him." He opened the second envelope, the one addressed to his mother. Inside was a single sheet, typed, not handwritten. "Mrs. Mercer, your son is receiving all correspondence. Please discontinue unnecessary duplication of mail. Excessive letters may delay delivery for all service members. Thank you for supporting our troops." No signature, just a stamped office line. a P.O. San Francisco. Danny's vision narrowed. They weren't just intercepting letters. They were answering them. They were reaching into his home and rearranging it like furniture. He folded the typed page carefully and slid it into his pocket like a weapon. Then he stood up and walked straight toward the radio shack. Klein saw him coming and rose quickly, as if he could sense the shape of the storm. "Danny," Klein said, stepping into his path. "Easy." Danny held up Lisa's letter. It's wrong on purpose." Klein's eyes scanned the top line. Sunshine. His jaw clenched. "Okay." Danny pulled out the typed note to his mother. Klein's face darkened as he read it. "That's not normal," Klein said. "No," Danny replied. "It's control." Klein lowered the papers, voice tight. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm done being handled," Danny said. Klein grabbed his sleeve. "Then be smart about it." Danny yanked his arm free. "Smart got Harlan killed and turned my girlfriend into a ghost." "That's not fair," Klein hissed. "Nothing here is fair," Danny snapped. "But I'm not going to sit in a hole and let someone else write my life." Klein glanced around. A couple of men were watching. Valdez was near the command tent, talking to Rusk. The radio operator looked up, uneasy. Klein leaned closer. "If you push this, they'll crush you." Danny's voice dropped. "Then I'll make them do it in the open." He turned and walked toward Lieutenant Rusk. Rusk saw him approach and set down his clipboard with a slow, practiced calm. "Mercer," Rusk said. "Something you need?" Danny held out the letter. "Sir, this isn't from my girlfriend." Rusk didn't take it. He smiled slightly. "That's a serious claim." "The code word is wrong," Danny said. "And I got a typed note addressed to my mother. Someone is responding to her as if they're the army." Rusk's smile thinned. "Your emotions are running high." "My emotions don't type letters," Danny said. A couple of men shifted, suddenly very interested in cleaning their rifles, suddenly very aware of where the lieutenant stood in the chain of survival. Rusk stepped closer. His voice stayed polite, but something hard settled in it. "Who have you been discussing this with?" Danny felt Klein behind him, silent, tense. "I'm discussing it with you," Danny said. Rusk's eyes flicked past Danny, scanning the small crowd, taking inventory. "You're in a combat zone, Mercer. Mail gets delayed. It gets damaged. Sometimes it's censored. That's how it works." "This is fabrication," Danny said. Rusk held Danny's gaze. "You accusing someone in this unit?" Danny didn't blink. "I'm accusing someone in the system." Rusk's voice sharpened. "And what do you think you're going to do about it?" Danny pulled the typed note from his pocket again and held it up. "I'm going to file a complaint. I'm going to send copies to battalion, to the chaplain, to the IG if I have to." Rusk's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly at the word copies. Danny realized, too late, that he'd said something that told Rusk exactly how dangerous he was becoming. Rusk's smile returned, now entirely false. "That's admirable," he said. "But first you're going to calm down." Rusk turned slightly. "Sergeant Valdez." Valdez moved in, heavy and fast. "Take Mercer," Rusk said. "Let him get some rest. He's clearly exhausted." Danny took a step back. "Sir, I'm not—" Valdez grabbed his arm, iron grip. "Let's go." Danny jerked away instinctively, and in that split second the air changed. Every man in the platoon felt it, the invisible line between discipline and violence snapping tight. Valdez shoved Danny hard. Danny stumbled, caught himself, rage flashing hot and stupid. He heard Klein say, "Sergeant, don't—" Rusk's voice was low. "Now, Valdez." Valdez drove Danny forward toward the command tent, toward the small, separate space that wasn't officially a jail, but could become one if an officer decided it was. Danny twisted, trying to pull free. "This is wrong, you can't—" Valdez's fist came up and struck Danny's ribs. A blunt, shocking hit that stole air, folded him inward. "Move," Valdez growled. Danny's knees buckled. Hands grabbed him from behind. Two men, not sure whether they were helping or obeying. It didn't matter. He was being moved. He felt his papers, Lisa's letter and the typed note, still in his pocket. He tried to reach for them, panicked that they'd be taken, destroyed, replaced. Valdez saw the motion and slammed Danny's wrist down. Danny's breath came in thin, painful sips. They shoved him into the tent. Inside it was dim and close. The air smelled of damp canvas and sweat and something antiseptic that didn't belong. A folding table sat in the center, a chair, a field phone, a metal footlocker. Rusk stepped in after him, ducking under the flap. Valdez stayed at the entrance like a guard dog. Rusk took off his helmet, set it down carefully. He spoke softly, as if they were discussing paperwork, not a man's sanity. "Mercer," Rusk said, "you've got two choices. You can stop this, and we forget it happened. Or you can keep going, and I can guarantee you'll regret it." Danny's ribs burned with every breath. He forced himself upright. "I want my letters," Danny said. Rusk's eyes cooled. "No, what you want is control, and you don't get control here." Danny stared at him. "You did this." Rusk didn't answer, not directly. He walked to the footlocker and opened it. Inside were stacks of envelopes, bundles tied with string, some stamped, some opened, some resealed. Danny's blood turned to ice. Rusk lifted one bundle and tossed it onto the table. Envelopes spilled like wounded birds. Danny saw familiar handwriting. Lisa's. A dozen letters, maybe more, dated over months, all addressed to him. Some had been opened cleanly, some torn at the edge, some with the purple examiner stamp. Danny's throat tightened so hard he thought he might choke. "You were never not getting mail," Rusk said. "You were getting what was appropriate." Danny's voice came out hoarse. "Appropriate for who?" Rusk leaned forward, palms on the table. "For the mission." Danny laughed once, a raw sound. "My girlfriend is the mission?" Rusk's expression didn't change. "Morale is a weapon. Panic is a weapon. Anger is a weapon. Letters can do more damage than a mortar round if they land at the wrong time in the wrong head." Danny's hands shook, not from fear now, but from an urge to tear something apart. "You wrote the breakup letter," Danny said. Rusk's gaze slid away for the first time, just a fraction. Confirmation, without words. "You wrote it," Danny repeated louder. Rusk straightened. "I authorized it." Danny stepped forward, pain forgotten. "You authorized—" Valdez moved instantly. He slammed Danny back into the chair with a force that made stars burst in Danny's vision. "Sit down," Valdez snarled. Danny gasped. His ribs screamed. Klein's voice came faintly from outside the tent. "Sir, Lieutenant, what the hell's going on?" Rusk didn't look toward the flap. "Specialist Klein, return to your position." Klein's boots shifted. "No, sir." A pause. Small. Deadly. Rusk's voice hardened. "That's an order." Another pause. Then Klein's voice, quieter, almost pleading. "Sir, this is wrong." Rusk met Danny's eyes, and in them Danny saw something he hadn't seen before. Not cruelty, not even hatred. Calculation. Rusk turned slightly, just enough to be heard outside. "Valdez." Valdez opened the tent flap. Danny couldn't see clearly, but he heard it. The quick scuffle, the grunt of a man being pushed back, the sharp click of a rifle safety. Klein said, "You're going to shoot me over mail?" Valdez said something Danny couldn't make out. Then Rusk's voice, calm as paperwork. "Specialist Klein is relieved. Escort him." Boots moved away. Danny's heart hammered. They were isolating him, cutting off witnesses. He leaned forward in the chair, voice strained. "This isn't going to stay here. People will find out." Rusk looked at him, almost pitying. "Who? Your mother? She'll get a polite type letter. Your girlfriend? She'll get silence or something that makes her stop writing. Your platoon? They'll do what they always do. They'll survive." Danny swallowed bile. Rusk picked up Lisa's real letters and tapped them into a neat stack. "You want them? Fine." He slid them across the table. Danny stared at them, desperate, furious. He reached out. Rusk's hand snapped down, pinning the stack. "But you don't get to decide what happens next." Danny's voice dropped to a whisper. "What do you want?" Rusk held Danny's gaze. "I want you to do your job. I want you alive enough to keep moving, and quiet enough not to infect other men with your crusade." Danny's hands curled against the chair's edge. "And if I don't?" Rusk's eyes were flat. "Then you become a problem, and problems get managed." For a long second, there was only the canvas tent breathing in and out with the wind. Then Rusk stood, took the letters, and put them back in the footlocker. He closed it with a metal click that sounded final. "I'm going to give you a chance," Rusk said. "You're going to walk out of here. You're going to say you overreacted. You're going to stop talking about mail." Danny's mouth tasted like copper. "And if I don't?" Rusk adjusted his helmet strap. "Then you'll be reassigned to point." Danny's stomach tightened. Point man. The first in the line. The one who found the tripwires with his body. The one who stepped on mines so others didn't. Sometimes it was rotation. Sometimes it was punishment dressed as rotation. Danny met Rusk's eyes. "You'd do that." Rusk's expression didn't change. "It's war, Mercer." Valdez stepped closer, looming. "Choose." Danny thought of Lisa's real letters trapped in that locker. Thought of his mother at home, trusting typed lies. Thought of Harlan's open eyes in the mud. He thought of the wrong word at the top of the page. Sunshine. It felt like a joke someone told with a knife. Danny forced himself to nod once. "Fine." Rusk smiled like a man who'd just solved a problem. "Good." He turned and left the tent. Valdez leaned down close, his voice low enough that it felt almost private. "You should have left it alone," he said. Danny looked up at him. "Why are you helping him?" Valdez's face twitched. "I'm helping you breathe. Don't confuse it." Then Valdez stepped out. Danny sat alone for a moment, heart racing, the air thick with humiliation and fury. He could hear the bass sounds again, distant and normal, as if nothing had happened. He stood slowly, ribs aching, and stepped outside. The men avoided his eyes. Even Klein was gone. Valdez pointed toward the perimeter. "You're on point for tomorrow's sweep." Danny's jaw tightened. "Yes, Sergeant." That night, Danny lay awake and tried to decide which was worse, the jungle outside the wire, or the knowledge that the enemy could wear American rank. Before dawn, they moved out. A routine sweep, a familiar line of men, spaced out through the brush. Morning fog clung low, making the world look soft, forgiving. Danny walked point. Every step felt like a negotiation with invisible death. Behind him, Valdez called quiet instructions. The platoon moved in Danny's footsteps, trusting him the way men had to trust the first man in line, whether they liked him or not. Danny's mind wasn't on the jungle, it was on the footlocker, on Lisa's trapped letters, on the wrong word. He watched the ground with fierce attention anyway. Fallen leaves, twisted vines, slight depressions. Anything that looked too neat. Half an hour in, the fog thinned. The sun began to burn through. Danny saw something ahead. A narrow stretch of path that looked used, flattened grass, broken stems. A game trail, maybe, or something else. He raised a hand, stopping the line. Valdez crouched behind him. "What?" Danny pointed. "Trail." Valdez studied it. "We go around." Danny nodded, but his eyes caught a detail that made his throat tighten. A thin wire, almost invisible, stretched low across the path, tied to a sapling. Tripwire. Danny's heart slammed. He held his hand up again, higher. "Wire." Valdez leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Good catch." Danny's breathing came shallow. Valdez signaled for the platoon to shift. They began to move wide, stepping carefully, slow, controlled. Then Danny heard the sound that didn't belong. A faint click behind him. Not from the jungle, from a rifle. Danny turned his head slightly, just enough to see. Valdez stood too close. His weapon angled wrong, low, toward Danny's back, not outward. Danny's blood went cold. Valdez's face was unreadable. His eyes were steady. The message wasn't spoken. You're managed now. Danny's mind raced. If Valdez fired, it would sound like contact, like an accident, like enemy fire, like anything they wanted it to be. A man on point got hit all the time. Danny forced himself to turn back forward, slow, careful, as if he hadn't noticed. His gaze locked on the tripwire again. It ran into a cluster of brush where the trigger device was hidden. Something metal, something carefully placed. A booby trap. Danny's mouth went dry. He could step back and let someone else deal with it. He could do what he was told and keep his head down. He could survive. Or he could make it impossible for them to keep writing his story quietly. He thought of his mother receiving typed reassurance. He thought of Lisa's real letters sealed in a locker. He thought of Klein being dragged away. Danny took a slow breath. The air smelled of wet leaves and gun oil. He raised his voice, louder than he should have in that moment. Loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Tripwire," Danny called. "Wire across the path. Looks like a rigged charge. Everyone freeze!" Men stopped hard. Someone cursed under their breath. A few heads turned. Valdez hissed, "Keep it down." Danny didn't. He took one step sideways, away from the wire, hands up to show he wasn't doing anything reckless. "We need EOD," he said loud, "or we mark it and pull back." Valdez's eyes sharpened. "Mercer, shut up." Danny looked over his shoulder just enough to meet Valdez's gaze. "Sir," he called, pitching his voice down the line toward Lieutenant Rusk. "We've got a booby trap on the trail." Rusk was farther back, out of sight, but Danny knew he'd hear the line carry the message. Danny could feel Valdez's patience thinning like a frayed rope. Valdez stepped in close, voice low and furious. "You trying to get people killed?" "I'm trying to keep them alive," Danny said. Valdez's eyes flicked to the men watching. Witnesses. Too many. Valdez's jaw worked as if chewing rage. Then he backed off half a step, forced to play the role. "All right," Valdez snapped to the platoon. "Hold position." Danny's heart hammered. He'd forced Valdez into the open. Now it was Rusk's turn. The platoon stayed frozen, while Valdez sent a runner back. Minutes crawled. The jungle hummed. A bird called once, then went silent. Danny knelt, staring at the wire. He kept his hands visible. He didn't move closer. He could feel sweat running down his spine. He heard footsteps behind him, careful, deliberate. Lieutenant Rusk came forward with the radio operator and one other man. Rusk crouched near Danny, face composed. "Good spot," he said. "You did your job." Danny didn't answer. Rusk studied the wire, then looked at Danny. "Now step back." Danny rose slowly and stepped back. Rusk stood too, dusting his hands like it was ordinary. Then softly, for Danny alone, he said, "You could have had an easy tour." Danny's voice came out rough. "You could have left my life alone." Rusk's eyes held his for a second. "Life is a tool," he said. "So is pain." Then Rusk turned to Valdez. "We'll bypass. Mark it." Valdez nodded, face locked down. Rusk motioned the platoon to move. "Let's go." They began to shift around the trap in a wide arc. Danny moved with them, but he felt it, the air tightening again, like the world was drawing breath. As he stepped around a thick root, his boot sank slightly into soft earth. He froze. Too late. A pressure plate didn't click like in the movies. It didn't announce itself. It simply gave under his weight with a small, wet give, like stepping on a rotten board. Danny's body reacted before his mind did. He tried to lift his foot slowly, praying the mechanism was forgiving. Valdez's voice snapped out, sharp, "Mercer, don't move." Danny's heart pounded. He kept his foot exactly where it was. He looked down. Half hidden under leaves, a flat piece of metal. Not the tripwire they'd seen. Another device, placed off to the side, where a man bypassing the obvious trap might step. A secondary. Danny's breath caught. Men behind him froze, eyes wide, suddenly remembering that luck ran out. Rusk stepped forward, calm. "Everyone back!" Danny's mouth went dry. "EOD," he said. "We need—" Rusk's voice cut in, soft as a knife. "No time." Danny stared at him. "What?" Rusk leaned slightly closer so only Danny could hear. "You made it loud," he murmured. "Now it's loud." Danny's vision tunneled. He understood then with horrible clarity what managed meant. Not just letters, not just morale, bodies too. Accidents that solved problems. Danny's hands trembled. He couldn't feel his fingers. Valdez hovered near, eyes fixed on Danny's foot, jaw tight, as if he hated this and would do it anyway. "Listen," Danny said, voice cracking. "If I lift my foot—" Rusk raised a hand, stopping him. "You don't lift it." Danny stared at him. "Then what?" Rusk's eyes were flat. "Then you stay." Danny's mind exploded into motion. He could scream. He could beg. He could call the platoon to witness. But witness didn't mean justice out here. It meant more men in danger, more chaos Rusk could shape. Danny looked past Rusk, past Valdez, at the line of men, faces pale, terrified, helpless. He saw in them the same thing he'd seen in Harlan's eyes at the end. Surprise that the world could end so fast. He thought of Lisa, real Lisa, writing letters that never reached him. He thought of his mother trusting a typed lie. He thought of Klein, dragged away for saying wrong. Danny took a slow breath. His ribs burned. Then he did the only thing left that felt like his. He lifted his head and spoke loudly, clearly, forcing his voice to carry down the line. "Listen up," Danny shouted. "If anything happens to me, you tell my mother the army was intercepting my mail. You tell her Lisa's letters were being held. You tell her Lieutenant Rusk—" Valdez lunged, trying to grab him. Rusk's voice snapped. "Shut him up." Hands clamped over Danny's mouth from behind. Danny fought them, desperate to get the words out, but the grip was strong and practiced. He couldn't breathe right. He tasted sweat and dirt and panic. He heard men shouting, confused, alarmed. "What's he saying?" someone yelled. "Get back," Rusk barked. "Everyone back!" Danny's eyes met Klein's absence like a wound. There was no one with the nerve to push through the officer's command. No one who wanted to be next. Danny's foot was still on the plate. His chest heaved against the hand over his mouth. Valdez hissed near his ear, almost pleading now, "Stop!" Danny's eyes burned. He shook his head, not stopping. The hand slipped. Danny sucked a breath and forced out one more line, hoarse and loud. "Milkshake!" The word was milkshake! Valdez's grip tightened on his shoulder, and Danny felt, rather than saw, the subtle shift. Valdez's knee bumped Danny's leg. It wasn't a shove. It was a nudge. Just enough. Danny's foot slid a fraction. The plate depressed fully. For a split second, there was absolute silence. The jungle holding its breath. Then the world turned white. The blast didn't feel like fire at first. It felt like being kicked out of existence. A violent, concussive punch that erased sound and replaced it with a ringing void. Danny's body lifted and slammed down. He couldn't tell where the sky was. He couldn't tell where his hands were. He couldn't hear his own scream, only the shriek of air and the distant, underwater shouting of men. Dust and leaves rained down. Pain arrived in waves, enormous and distant, like thunder you saw before you heard. He tried to move. Nothing responded the way it should. He opened his eyes, one of them maybe, and saw shapes leaning over him, faces smeared with dirt, mouths moving. He saw Valdez's face close, jaw clenched, eyes shining with something that looked like grief. He saw Rusk behind him, standing back, clean, a silhouette against the green. Danny tried to speak. His tongue felt heavy. His throat tasted of blood. He forced air out anyway. Milk, he tried. Valdez bent closer. "Don't," Valdez whispered. "Don't talk." Danny's vision blurred. He thought of a mailbox in Ohio. Red flag up, empty, waiting. He thought of Lisa reading silence and believing it was him. He thought of his mother holding a typed lie and trusting it, because trust was all she had. He tried one more time, pushing against the dark. "Tell," he rasped. Valdez's face twisted. He shook his head like he was arguing with himself. Danny's breath hitched. The jungle sound returned slowly. The insects, the distant thump of artillery, the frantic, terrified voices of his platoon. Someone was calling for a medic. Someone was crying. Danny's world narrowed to a small, bright point. In that final narrowing, he saw something slip from his torn pocket, paper fluttering, stained, caught by a breeze. An envelope. Lisa's handwriting. It drifted down into the leaves like a wounded thing trying to land. Danny's eyes tracked it weakly, and he felt a strange, bitter relief. At least one of her letters had finally made it to him. He tried to hold on to that. The bright point grew smaller. Voices faded. The war kept breathing. And somewhere far away, in a place with clean floors and fluorescent lights, a mailbag moved on a conveyor belt, and nobody heard the sound of one thread snapping.